Okay, so people may or may not have heard at the Abbey. Yesterday there was a very brutal terrorist attack in Paris, and at one satirical magazine, some two gunmen came in and killed about 12 people and injured many more. And it was a magazine where they apparently satirized, anyway, like everyone and everything. They had an issue in the past that was where the guest editor was the Prophet Muhammad, and that was apparently very offensive to some people. And they were going to have another issue called Sharia law. No, Sharia Hebdo, with the name of the publication, but changing the first word, because their first word started with a CH, but put Sharia, so it sounded like Sharia, like since Sharia law. So, so these gunmen burst into their office and just sprayed people, and they're looking for them right now. So Paris, all of France, all of the West is really kind of very, very upset and concerned about this, but especially in France, where they really cherish their freedom of speech, and the French culture, they like to satirize people. They like to make fun of people. It's part of the culture, And, I realize some people like satire, some people don't. It depends a lot on your personality. Personally speaking, I don't read satire magazines and things like that, but I have that kind of sense of humor that can, make fun in that way. And but somebody wrote in asking about this, this kind of thing. So I'll read you the question. It's a thoughtful question, something for us to, think about. So in light of the murder of the religious satirists in France, I think of karma and cause and effect. No one deserves to die. Murder is never excusable or acceptable. But there are also no accidents in this world, and nothing happens in a vacuum. If one spends one's life drawing cartoons that shock and upset fundamentalists and religious extremists, one thing is certain: one's work is not going to bring a positive result. It will not generate warm hearts and understanding. Freedom of the press is very important, freedom of speech too, but surely we have to take some responsibility for the part our actions play in everything that happens in our experience. There are many sick people in the world. Do we, who can think a little more clearly, not have a bigger responsibility to not inflame their anger with our actions? Then here's the question: where do we draw the line between free speech and right speech? Okay, so there's a lot of kind of questioning in here, and I will just share some thoughts. I'm not going to pretend to give the pronouncement on this. Okay, but this statement: if one spends one's life drawing cartoons that shock and upset fundamentalists and religious extremists, one thing is certain: one's work is not going to bring a positive result. It will not generate warm hearts and understanding. So in terms of the fundamentalists and the extremists, for sure, it's not going to generate warm hearts and understanding with them. I'm wondering what will generate warm hearts and understanding with them. That also is a question I have. Because I think there's people, there's people who are pushed to extremes because they're not being heard or not being respected. And when they feel heard and respected and so forth and included, then the extremism goes down. There's other people who are extremists who love just being a rebel, who have a lot of internal anger and are completely stuck in that. And even if other people approach them and try and listen and so on, they're really not interested because there's too much adrenaline going on and they're too much into, their rebelliousness and their violence. That's the way it seems to me. I could be wrong. Of course, as these same people age, their thoughts are going to change and their actions are going to change too. But I just watch sometimes. It is I'm going off on a tangent here. But sometimes liberation movements, the people are very good at being rebels and fighting for their freedom, but they're not very good at governing once they get their freedom. Yeah? And so it makes me wonder, do you need two different, are there two different sets of people? One set that are the rebels and the other set that can govern afterwards, Or can people who were, rebels to what extent and what conditions can make them change their mind so that they later become people who can govern? Yeah. It'd be interesting to look at American history in this regard too, the people who were rebels initially, and could they make that switch over into governing? Some of them could, yeah. But I wonder, I bet some of them probably couldn't, because you get your identity so wrapped up in your anger and your belligerence. So it's a little bit off the topic, but it's making me wonder in all these cases exactly who is getting offended and why are they being offended. Okay? So having grown up in a minority culture myself, that's a culture that's very sensitive about people making fun of you and prejudice and everything. I grew up Jewish. So there, in Jewish culture, if a Jew makes fun of Jewish stereotypes and things like that, everybody laughs and thinks it's hysterical. If somebody who's not Jewish says the very same thing, they get offended. Yeah? So I wonder sometimes, I don't know Muslim culture that much, I wonder if there's that sense of humor within certain, because Muslim culture also, it's not just one thing. Yeah, so I'm sure some Muslims can have that sense of humor where they can make fun of themselves, but if other people do it, they don't like it. But I'm wondering people who, these young men who are particularly going on jihad, who are quite angry and want to fight, which it appears that those are the people who are behind this attack. I wonder how they are with that, to what extent they have a sense of humor at all about anything. Yeah. So it's just a question I have about, I'd like to understand that kind of personality a little bit better. Yeah. Okay, but so then the question is, okay, freedom, so you're not generating warm hearts and understanding. On the other hand, freedom of the press is important and freedom of speech is too. Yeah. But surely we have to take responsibility for the part our actions play in everything that happens in our experience. So yeah, we do need to take responsibility. It seems from what I've read that the people in this particular publication, they knew they offended everybody and they were perfectly accepting and happy about doing it. There had already been a firebomb in their office some years ago, And that didn't deter them. They just kept on going. So I think, that many of them, were kind of aware of the danger and of what they were doing. Then the question comes, does that mean that they shouldn't have done it? Yeah. And here I think we need to really look at motivations very carefully. Yeah. What was their motivation in doing satire? Yeah. What is our motivation when we say things to different people? Because, again, you can do the same action, but with very different motivations. So you can, do cartoons and write satire with the motivation because you're really angry and you want to upset people and you get some kind of delight in making people upset. Or you could do that same kind of journalism as a way of pointing things out to people, of getting people to think. Yeah, satire can be very important in that way. And I think satire has a certain kind of humor, too, that can help people release tension. Yeah, tension that might otherwise go into hatred. If they're able to make fun of something, then it releases that tension instead of developing hatred. Okay, so there's many sick people in the world, so those of us who think more clearly, don't we have a bigger responsibility to not inflame their anger with our actions? Now here, this one I want to call into question. If yes, there's sick people in the world, and yes, you don't want to inflame their anger. Yeah, if you know that it's not going to do any good. On the other hand, if we monitored everything we said on the basis of are other people going to like us, then we would never be able to say one word. Because whatever we say, somebody is not going to like. Yeah. And we see this, even living with people who we have the same values, we like each other, we're friends. People can get offended, misinterpret, get angry at even good morning if it's not said the way they like it. So, to censor our own speech out of fear of upsetting other people, that to me is like really going way to an extreme where you can't say anything. Yeah. And so we have to, I think the thing is to really assess who we're speaking to, what our motivation is, what are the possible effects of our speech, and then to make a decision based on that and to accept the responsibility for it. But to know, goodness, we're never going to please everybody. And even actually, basically any kind of humor, somebody's at the end of it, isn't it? Yeah? And so how do you, I think humor is quite important. And I think in our Dharma practice, we need to be able to laugh at ourselves and poke fun at ourselves. Because when we can't, we take ourselves too seriously, and it's just crazy. And you'll see sometimes that I poke fun of each of you, even when you don't like it or you don't want it, but it's my attempt to kind of say, hey, loosen up a little bit, don't take yourself so seriously. Okay? Hopefully you know that I'm coming from a good place, but even if you know that, sometimes you still get mad at me. Yeah, what to do? Yeah, so here, it's a difficult kind of thing. The people in France, they feel really strongly about their freedom of speech, and they were all out in the street last night, just thousands and thousands of people in the streets, just saying we cherish our free speech. And even though many people in France itself didn't like that publication because they offended everybody, still they valued free speech and that idea that, people can speak and you don't go around killing people just because you don't like what they say. Yeah. Actually, one satirist did a cartoon today of, I thought it was very cute. I didn't see it, I just read about it, of two gunmen holding their AK, whatever, 47s or whatever it is, looking at each other quizzically, saying, we better be careful, maybe they have pens. Yeah? So, I think that's quite clever, and it's also very true, isn't it? Nicholas Kristof, who writes for the New York Times, he says the thing that frightens men the most is women with an education. Yeah, women with a pen, who can express herself and be articulate. I don't think he's referring to all men. I think he's, saying that for some men that's quite a scary thing. Yeah, so they want to restrict women's activities. So I think, I'm all for freedom of speech. I do recommend, some on our own side, being careful of who we say what to and really looking at our motivations. For example, one thing that I think would be worthy of some restriction being put on is, there's that church from Kansas who, when there were military people who died and at their funerals, they would go right to the funeral with their signs and placards and saying, this is a punishment from God because of homosexuality. Which has nothing to do with that person who's being buried, but they just make this big thing about it. And, in my mind, I might be wrong, but it seems to me their motivation is to hurt. Yeah, and I think they succeed in doing that. I think that's very disrespectful to a family who is grieving, to have somebody bring up that kind of issue, which doesn't even pertain to their loved one, because who knows if their loved one is gay or straight. It doesn't matter to the people from that church, they just wanted to make a fuss. My brother lives in Topeka, where they're from. I always tease him about it. You're from the place with the people from that crazy church. Yeah. So that kind of thing, I could see a reason if, there were a court case and the judge said, yes, you had to be outside a certain distance to make that kind of remark, because that, I think, is something that's the motivation is designed to hurt people's feelings, Now, what these guys in the French magazine, whether they had the motivation to hurt, I don't know. Maybe they just, that's their sense of humor, and that's the way they relate to the world, and it could be that that's also the way they talk about themselves, with that kind of satirical, sarcastical sense of humor. Okay? So I told you I'm not coming up with the right answer, but I'm trying to just share some thoughts with you. Maybe some of you want to have some thoughts about it too. Mm-hmm. Yes, even when you don't speak, you can upset people. Very true. Very true. Especially if there's something wrong and nobody speaks up about it. Yeah, can be very upsetting to people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One is the line between free speech and hate speech, I think, is getting...
Between what?
Free speech and hate speech.
Free speech and hate speech. The line, hate speech. Yeah, so the effect of satire for public good, talking about one of our friends in Mexico who is a political satirist, and he's felt like that's really brought about some good changes in the country by getting people to think about things a little bit more deeply.
In a way, just as you pointed out, that people can hear it. It's not like it hit over the head, it's funny.
Yeah, so you're saying it in a funny way, makes it easier for some people to hear. Some people, no matter what you say, they get offended. Yeah, even if you don't mean to be funny or satirize. But yeah, sometimes it is a good way to help people hear something. Yeah. I mean, to kill somebody because of what they say, that's like way over the limit, you know? But her question more was, you know, the person's individual responsibility for bringing on what they did. But then that's so hard, you know, because, I mean, it relates to the thing. If a woman dresses in a certain way, does it make it okay for men to rape her? Yeah. Does it, you know, are you bringing it on? Are you, you know, do you deserve it? I mean, there's so many cases like this. Even somebody is abusing you, if you speak out about it, they may abuse you more. So does that mean that you should keep your mouth shut? Yeah? Uh-huh.
I'm trying to figure out in my own mind, what does it mean to take responsibility for your actions? Does that mean accept the consequences without whining?
Yeah, so what does it mean to accept responsibility for our actions? Does that mean to accept the consequences without whining? I think, yeah, in many ways it does mean that. Now, of course, there's consequences of our actions that are reasonable. I mean, in terms of karma, yes, we accept it. That's just an impersonal thing. In terms of something like this, do you accept it without whining? No, I think there's a good reason for public protest about journalists getting killed because people don't like what they say. I don't think that's one where you just kind of, you know, say, well, they brought it on, and so stop whining. Yeah. Because I think there's got to be a way in society for people to speak out without fear for their lives. Yeah? Yeah. One thing that I saw that I was impressed with is John Kerry spoke about it in English, and then he spoke in French. You know, it's like, oh, an American politician who knows another language. What a novel thing. Yeah? Because so much in our country we feel like everybody should just know our language. So I was quite impressed when he did that. Any other comments or anything? In any case, I think we should definitely do prayers for the people who were murdered and also for the people who murdered them. You know, that the pain and anger and ignorance in their mind that is helping them to create the cause for hellish rebirths, that be alleviated, you know, and that they can think of, you know, better ways to deal with their emotions and better ways to put their energies for change.